Yo, yo, yo. Y'all know what time it is. I'm back. A little bit of a different setting, as you can see. Uh, my first video, as a matter of fact, I did it down here with my homeboy, Tim Bridge. Go check out his podcast, Conversations with Tim Bridge. He was gracious enough to let me borrow his facilities to come and do what I do. Just know that the opinions, how they always say, reflected here today are my own and no one else's. But shout out to my homie Dave Tinsley for letting me come through and rock. So you all remember the last topic I discussed, the theme of the presentation, or the name of the show was Neo-Populism and the cost of moral confusion. So we're still sort of riding that wave, because remember I told you guys I wanted to do a whole kind of series, like really diving into a lot of things that may on the surface seem separate, seem a bit disparate, but in my mind, I'm going to try to bring it all together for you guys. So quick bit of house cleaning, like I always do. So like before, when when I do these I don't know. I mean, I try not to like call them like lectures. You know what I mean? I mean, some people call them that. But I sort of let the market decide. How they want to view my content, but I don't want to put too much on it, right? Because I don't want to come off as being, pretentious. But, I leave that up to the audience. But thank you all for rocking with me like you always do. So, like I said, when I do these, I have a tendency to sometimes I get a little bit excited, and sometimes my mouth almost goes faster than my brain. And so as I'm reading through the notes that I have prepared when I do these, sometimes I actually read things that aren't there, or sometimes I'll say things or certain dates that are incorrect. Like I always told you guys, I may not get you directly on the target, on the bullseye, but I will have you, somewhere in the zone, somewhere in the drop zone. So if you go back to the previous video before this one, you read the description where I put in some of my misreads because I said some of the dates incorrect. But I won't unpack all of that all over again or rehash it, but you can just go and check it out for yourself. But I do want to kind of go back to the previous show and just kind of go over some things. So we're really starting to get into Germany and Germany's exportation of a lot of destructive ideas. And in many respects, again, this is not a knock. I have to put this qualifier out there before someone thinks that I am hating on the German peoples. That's not the case, of course. But the facts are the facts, and in history, it is what it is. I think in many respects, I think Germany is still paying a heavy price because I think there is this, and I'm being extremely presumptuous, of course, because I don't know any Germans. It's not like I study contemporary German culture or politics that much. So pardon me if I am assuming something that isn't exactly correct, but I do think that there is probably a post World War II malaise, if you will, going on right now, and I think Europe as a whole is suffering from that. But I think in this particular case, as it pertains to the Germans, I think there is a bit of guilt that they carry around for being the country that brought Nazism, for example, to the world, and we're going to get off into that, and that's sort of like what this conversation is about here. Talked about before, the consequences of France's liberation of the Rhineland. France did a ton in the late 18th, early 19th century to sort of bring a lot of these Renaissance ideas into Central Europe, right? And there was a lot of back and forth, a lot of military campaigns and things of that nature going on. And I particularly spoke about in the previous video how I personally believe that Napoleon's campaigns had a sort of long-lasting effect on Jews in what was then Prussia. Then, of course, after the Battle of Waterloo, and France was sort of pushed back, Prussia began to reinstill or reinstitute a lot of the pre-existing crackdowns that were in place prior to France's liberation of Prussia. And we're going to talk about the consequences of that. And of course, I went into detail as far as, how the consequences of that affected one man in particular. And that was the life of Moses Hess. All right. Now, again, I'm going to talk about, again, Jews sort of being at the backdrop. We're going to get into later on how Israel came into being in the First and Second World Wars, all these things, right? I'm going to try to put all these things together from my point of view. And so, what you hear a lot of, and what I wanted to address prior in the previous talk that I did, was to sort of address this idea about, I guess, Jews and their relationship to the philosophy of communism. All right. It's interesting because to be Jewish is to belong to a perceived ethnic group and to also be a member of a faith at the same time. The advantage that Christians have in this regard is that when the Christian doctrine is used to promote pernicious ideas, the person is written off as a heretic. And, most Christians dismiss heretical Christians as not truly being Christian, or they say Christian in name only. But a Jew is, they are unable to escape their Judaism or their ethnicity because they were sort of born that way. And so, again, this is why I felt it important to bring this up. Because there, during that particular time, you had a lot of prominent Jewish people in Prussian society. Once France was defeated and removed, many of them converted to Christianity to avoid persecution. And we see examples of this, at various times and in various places throughout history. And so, as I mentioned before, some people may or may not know, but of course, Karl Marx's father, Henry Marx, converted to Christianity, became a Lutheran, and raised his family as such. And of course, Marx would be baptized at a young age, and he was a very devout Christian until his college years. And so for me, that begs the question. Of course, Marx is an ethnic Jew, but for a time, he was in fact a Christian. But again, when we talk about these ideas, and when we like to liken Jews or link Jews to the philosophy of communism, of course, we point out the obvious that Karl Marx was Jewish, but many of us neglect the fact that Karl Marx was at one point a professing Christian as well. As a matter of fact, he was perhaps not just perhaps, but he was, in fact, a Christian longer than he was a religious Jew. Interesting tidbit, of course, that Marx descends from a long line, from a line of rabbis on both his mother and his father's side. One of his brothers, I forget his name. I think Marx was the oldest of his brothers to both his parents, and one of his brothers, I believe, stayed with the family tradition and went on to actually become a rabbi. And for that, his father and the rest of the family subsequently disowned him. And so the family, who had become Christian, had disowned the one brother who decided to become a rabbi. Just interesting tidbit there. And I know I wanted to say this because this came across, this crossed my radar over the past couple of months since the last time I've been here with you guys. And, I like to be honest and open and talk about the idea and the concept of, this thing we call anti-Semitism. And I try to talk about it in an open and fair way. And one of the most consequential men in world history, but it's especially American history, of course, is Henry Ford. Now, I brought up Henry Ford not in the previous talk, but long time ago. I think I may have been talking about Barack Obama or something like that. But I mentioned Henry Ford a while ago, and when I say certain things, I like to be open and honest and come back and put corrections or whatever the case may be into the record, right? And so Henry Ford is considered, aside from all of his accomplishments in the field of auto manufacturing and so on, but of course, Henry Ford is seen by many, if not most, of course, to be an anti-Semite, or perhaps that aspect of Henry Ford's legacy is wide. I don't know if it's fair to say it's widely known, but it is known. And before, I kind of gave a defense of Henry Ford because Henry Ford's perceived anti-Semitism may or may not. And I posed the question because I'm not an expert on the life of Henry Ford, although as a Detroit native, you would think I would be. Perhaps I need to invest some time into really unpacking the life of Henry Ford. But it is a bit. It is difficult at a glance. Of course, it's not difficult if you actually do the research and do the work, but it's difficult at a glance to know, especially back then, if someone was actually a Jew hater or were they just an anti-communist. Another person synonymous with or a huge part of their legacy, or seen as a blight on their legacy, is Walt Disney, who many claim was an anti-Semite, but Walt Disney was also somewhat of an outspoken anti-communist, and so it's a bit difficult to know. But I bring up Henry Ford because I just learned recently, within the past couple of months or so, that Henry Ford may have been the person most responsible for the dissemination in the United States of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. And I mentioned the Protocols of the Elders of Zion in my last talk as well, a work that many scholars widely dismiss as an unmitigated forgery. Now, of course, many people will say, well, what sort of personal interest do these so-called scholars have in dismissing it or writing it off as some sort of conspiracy? But of course, or forgery. Of course, I am of the opinion that the Protocols of the Elders of Zion is a complete fabrication, no different than the Willie Lynch letter. So perhaps Henry Ford was more of an anti-Semite than I gave him credit for. I perhaps wanted to try and keep the verdict somewhat ambiguous because, again, leftists, particularly left-wing Jews, are especially keen on trying to hide behind a faith and a people that they care nothing about. And I think I outlined that at least somewhat significantly in my previous talk on Neo-Populism and the cost of moral confusion. And this is sort of like, I kind of wanted to make this like a part 2, even though I didn't really, I'm not, well, you guys will see. You guys will see. But again, like I mentioned before, it's playing out like the Marvel Cinematic Universe. That's kind of how I think about my content. And so let's go back a bit, and we're going to go back into Marx. We're going to revisit some aspects of Marx and some of the things that I mentioned earlier, but I just want to give some more detail. So here we go. So that's my preamble. Now let's get into some new information. So after Marx received his PhD from the University of Jena, he became an editor for Rheinische Zeitung. Pardon my poor German. I don't speak it. Let me try it one more time. Rheinische Zeitung. And in English, it means Rhenish newspaper. All right. So after he graduated from Jena, he went on to become an editor, if not the chief editor, for a Rhenish newspaper in the early 1840s, during which time he met Moses Hess. If you don't know who Moses Hess is, go and look him up, or go back to, again, my previous YouTube video to get more information on Moses Hess. It is believed that we don't know the exact date, but he did meet Moses Hess in the early 1840s. Go check out my earlier upload on Moses Hess. Now, at this time in Marx's life, he was not a communist. Marx was not a communist in the early 1840s. In fact, Marx dismissed Hess from the newspaper for his radical writings. So Hess was a contributor to the Rheinland Zeitung newspaper, but Hess's materials were too overtly radical. Now, albeit Marx did harbor ideas of revolution, Hess's angst-laden writings were too overt during a time of intense Prussian censorship. So you had the Prussian government cracking down on radicals. And this was true in many a country in Europe at the time, which is why a lot of these radical figures during this time are sort of hard to pin down, because they were getting chased after one country after another. They were getting chased out of. And so in an attempt to save the paper, Marx fired Hess from his position at Rheinland Zeitung. However, this was to no avail. The Prussian government would shut down the paper in 1843. Marx would go on to relaunch the paper as Neue Rheinland Zeitung, which is the new Rhenish newspaper, as the official newspaper of the Communist League in 1848. But that's in 1848. So let's go back to 1843. Marx, now on the radar of the Prussian government, fled with his wife Jenny to France, where he would meet three men that would further alter the course of his life and subsequently history at large. And those three men are Pierre Joseph Proudhon, Mikhail Bakunin, and Heinrich Heine. Heinrich Heine is another one whom I mentioned in my previous discussion. Didn't go into a lot of detail about Heine, but Heine was another radical. But his field of expertise was, of course, poetry and literature. And, Heine had some very interesting things to say about Marx. He wasn't very, he didn't have very nice opinions about Marx once he had gotten to know him. And that is pretty much true of anyone who had ever known Marx, except perhaps his children, the three that survived, and Friedrich Engels. Now, Friedrich Engels, I want to read this in the order that I typed it out. I lost my place for a second. Here we go. Friedrich Engels, who had already been recruited into the ranks of the communist movement by Moses Hess, Hess convinced Engels to become a communist, published his first solo work titled The Conditions of the Working Class in 1844. It was this work in particular that prompted Marx to seek out the young firebrand for a potential collaboration. Again, this community of radicals is kind of like somewhat of a small community, and these guys would run across each other from time to time. I think Marx had met Engels before in passing. Marx, Hess, and Engels were together at times, commingled, ran in the same circles. So Marx and Engels had known of one another, but they didn't really begin to foment a real bond until after 1848. It was this work, I just read that. Marx to this point had never written about economics, nor had he displayed any interest in it. You all recall, or Marx is most known for his ideas and theories of political revolution. But Marx's magnum opus, of course, is Das Kapital. Well, Marx would die before Das Kapital he was alive during Volume 1's publication, but Das Kapital, or Volume 2 and Volume 3 was published by Engels after the death of Karl Marx and Karl Marx's information. His ideas were cobbled together and deciphered vis-a-vis poorly written manuscripts and put out by Friedrich Engels. But it took Karl Marx 16 years before he would even have enough information or research put together to complete or to justify a publication of at least the first volume. That is because Marx lied. Marx didn't know economics. He had no interest in economics until he read Engels. A point of fact, a lot of what we consider to be quote unquote Marxist when it comes to Marx's analysis of economics comes by way of Friedrich Engels, in fact. But Marx, it took him an extremely long time to write Das Kapital because he pretty much BS'd his way through it, because at the time when he agreed to put together an economic treatise, he had to first learn at least a decent bit about economics to be able to write on it. But he didn't know economics. That's why it took him so long. And of course, he was a serial procrastinator. And so Marx and Engels, let's go back. Marx and Engels would go on to seize control of the upstart Communist League, and the rest, as they say, is history. And I won't get into all of the chicanery that went on there and how Marx and Engels were able to seize control of the Communist League, which was a group that began as its original name was the League of the Just. It became the Communist League, and then it became the International Workmen's Association, and culminated in the first Congress of the Communist International. Now, in the previous installment, I made brief mention of German socialist Ferdinand Lassalle, to whom Marx referred to as a Jewish nigger. I think before I said that Marx called him a nigger Jew, but it was a Jewish nigger, but same thing. So I wanted to go into more detail on that. So Marx would also refer to Lassalle as the greasy Jew, the little kike, water Polak Jew, and Jew Brown. Marx would hide his contempt for Lassalle due to his need for literary work at a time when he was close to indigent. So what that means in so many words is Marx was broke, he was poor. Ferdinand Lassalle was the connect, and so Marx needed a job. And so he would lie to Lassalle to his face and pretend to be his friend, but behind his back, when he wrote letters to Engels, he would dog Lassalle behind his back. Okay. In a letter to Engels, here is what Marx said of Lassalle. This is a quote, this is the letter. It is now perfectly clear to me that, as testified also by his cranial formation, we're talking about phrenology now, his cranial formation, eugenics, and so on, and his hair growth, he is descended from the Negroes who joined Moses' exodus from Egypt. Unless his paternal mother and grandmother were crossed with a nigger, unless his paternal mother or grandmother was crossed with a nigger, well, this combination of Jewish and Germanic stock with the Negroid basic substance is bound to yield a strange product. The fellow's importunity is also nigger-like. This is what he said of Lassalle. Engels himself would refer to Lassalle as a, quote, true Jew. And of course, this was meant to be derogatory. But he also stated to a friend, this is Engels in 1851, Engels speaking to a friend, that he hopes the presence of persecution of Jews in Germany will spread no further. So this is, to all of you, all of my pro-black power to the people revolutionaries out there, right? Your progenitor, your father, your idol, your hero. That is how he felt about Negroes and Jews. Now, remember, before I talked on the Jewish question, was an essay written by Marx in his response to Bruno Bauer. I quoted from On the Jewish Question a lot in my previous upload. You can go check it out. Marx chides Jews for their social and cultural traits, right? But in that same essay, Marx would defend the Jews' right to full political equality. While that may seem contradictory, one might assume, Marx believed that the characteristics he found unbecoming of Jews would cease to be with the disappearance of capitalism. thus leading to the, quote, abolition of Jewry. Now, with the abolition of capitalism, or with the disappearance of capitalism, the negative, unbecoming traits of the Jew would be abolished. And so here you have a situation where Jews are blamed for the rise or the success of capitalism or the free market system, if you're talking about economics and not ideology, whilst at the same time, these very same or Jews are also blamed for the spread of communism. And what I also find strange is that, again, you have this conservative contingent, right? This neo-populist contingent who are united in their anti-leftist sentiment, right? And so the goal is to, of course, to blame the Jew, right? And so when you have these attitudes, let's just say, for example, when it comes to these ideas of black liberation, we talk about the civil rights movement, we talk about the Black Power movement, heck, going all the way back to the NAACP and on and on and on. When it comes to these radical social justice movements led by blacks, we get upset that there's always a Jew behind the curtain. Okay. And then we say, well, we don't want to think this way. I'm talking about blacks now. We don't want to have this particular political orientation because Jewish people think this way. Jewish people made us think this way. Right. But when we attack Jews, right, for simply, perhaps just being Jewish. Again, I don't know. It's hard for me because I can't get into the minds of a people or get into the mind of each individual. But what I find strange is that the same criticism that you hear a lot of modern day neo-populist conservatives levying towards Jews are the exact same sentiments that men like Karl Marx himself, or even Moses Hess himself, would have these same ideas and opinions about Jews as well. So in an attempt to not have a Jewish mind, in order to not think like a Jew, we turn around and say things that Jewish people told us to say and believe about Jews in the first place. And so in an attempt to evade it, we go right back into the clutches of thinking like a Jew. This is according to you all's logic, you all's standard, and what you say and what you believe. Of course, this is not about ideas, right? This is about a certain segment of the human race, that segment being Jews. So who, in fact, taught you how to hate Jews? Who taught you how to say the kinds of things that you say about Jews? Not other Jews, because you don't want to think like a Jew. Moses Hess didn't give you those ideas. Karl Marx didn't give you those ideas. People like Ruth Fisher didn't give you those ideas. Now, interesting fact, I just thought you guys can look this up, when you have time. Of course, Karl Marx would also write propaganda for the North during the Civil War. I mentioned before when I did put together some content with another fellow content creator. It goes by Pretty Liddy. I brought up a man named Wilhelm Marr. He's just no secret. A lot of people who know the history of Jew hatred have come across Wilhelm Marr, who popularized the term anti-Semitism in the late 1800s. This was when hatred towards the Jew became specifically racial, as opposed to, let's just say, a social or cultural or even religious, going back to the Middle Ages. Now, also recall when I spoke of Karl Marx's son-in-law, fellow radical Paul Lafargue. Remember, I brought up Paul Lafargue, and of Lafargue, Friedrich Engels. This is something that I neglected to mention the first time. Friedrich Engels believed that Lafargue possessed 1/8 or 1/12 nigger blood. And in 1887, Lafargue was up for election, for a city council seat in a part of Paris that was home to a zoo. Follow me. Now, Engels would write to Laura, who was Karl Marx's daughter and Paul Lafargue's wife. He would write to her, this is Engels, quote, being in his quality as a nigger, a degree nearer to the rest of the animal kingdom than the rest of us, he is undoubtedly the most appropriate representative of that district because it had a zoo. Okay. So that's just a bit more unpacking of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels and their racial attitudes. And, a lot of people have these questions about, why does there seem to be this kinship? Why is it that blacks who see themselves as being oppressed or persecuted in the United States, for example, why does there seem to be this sense that they are kindred spirits with Jews? Where did this come from? And again, you see these racial attitudes about Jews and Negroes or niggers kind of being lumped and cobbled together so as to suggest that both Jews and Negroes are inferior to everyone else. And so, but no one, of course, we're going to talk this conversation. We're going to get into the ideas, some of the ideas and the people that helped to create the Nazi ideology and the ideas that underpin Nazism. All right. But again, men like Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, right? These weren't communists. These were communists. I'm sorry, but they weren't Nazis as we kind of, when we think about Nazis, right? We don't think about Karl Marx typically. At least we know our buddies on the left certainly do not. Now, I wanted to start off here talking about the legacy of Germany by bringing up the political career of or some of his achievements as it relates to the topic, the central topic at hand, and that is the political achievements of Otto von Bismarck. A lot of you, people who have heard of Otto von Bismarck, in order to understand Germany and the lead up to the First World War, it is important to know at least a cursory understanding of who Otto von Bismarck was. Who was Otto von Bismarck? Otto von Bismarck was born in Prussia on April 1st, April Fools, 1815, and died near Hamburg on July 30th, 1898. Bismarck was Prime Minister of Prussia from 1862 to 71 and was the founder and first Chancellor of the German Empire from 1871 to 1890. Bismarck earned the moniker the Iron Chancellor for his military prowess, instigating decisive wars against Denmark, Austria, and France, which in turn united 39 independent German states under total Prussian leadership. All right. Bismarck, considered by many historians to be an uber conservative for his intense militarism and national pride, was actually the political gateway whose path would pave the way for the rise of National Socialism in Germany by the early 20th century. Bismarck introduced all sorts of progressive reforms, some of which included universal male suffrage and the establishment of the first modern welfare state. The unification of Germany and Bismarck's ceaseless provocation of his European rivals would help lead to the first of two world wars in 1914. The German Empire, led by Chancellor Theobald Holweg, would go on. The German Empire, led by Chancellor Theobald Holweg, would go on to lose the first installment alongside their allies, Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria, and the Ottoman Empire. More to come on the Ottoman Empire later. We might not get here today, but beware, it's coming. It's coming. Because, of course, I remember all of this with Israel. I'm gonna tie it all in. But it just takes a little bit of time. It takes time. Maybe some of our conservative friends know I'm not a big deal. I'm not, I'm not some celebrity. I'm not uber social media famous with millions of subscribers and followers. But perhaps some of our conservative friends are listening. Now, again, you're going to hear me name some names shortly once I really get going. Now, who were the brains behind the man? Who was the brains behind Otto von Bismarck? Well, let us begin with the German Historical School of Economics. The German Historical School of Economics emerged onto the world stage in the mid-1800s as a reaction to the predominant laissez-faire attitudes spreading throughout Germany at the time. It explicitly rejected the brand economics espoused by the British classical school of David Ricardo and James Mill. James Mill from the, when I think of, he's from the classical British school of economics, but of course, I think of also the Austrian school. The Austrian school of economics was an economic or a philosophic rival to the German historical school. And of course, perhaps the most famous student or protege of the Austrian school of economic thought is, of course, Friedrich von Hayek. And Friedrich von Hayek is a man who I am going to quote later on in this discussion as we move forward. So the roots of the German school were steeped in Hegelian philosophy, in that economics, like history, is interpreted as revealing some essential underlying idea or principle over time. After the Franco-Prussian War of 1871 and German unification, the German classical school became a serious force in German politics, becoming extremely influential in the forging of Bismarckian economic and social policy by packing the German civil service and academia with its members. Members of the historical school viewed government intervention in the economy as a positive and necessary force. Also recall, if you peruse through my YouTube channel, I did a whole thing on whether fascism belongs on the political left or on the political right. Again, this is, a bit of an Easter egg. And here we are here today, still asking these questions. What does it even mean to be on the right versus to be on the left? Now, Friedrich Hayek said of this period, here's Hayek's description of this period. For over 200 years, English ideas have been spreading eastward. The rule of freedom which had been achieved in England seemed destined to spread throughout the world. By about 1870, the reign of these ideas had probably reached its easternmost expansion. From then onward, it began to retreat, and a different set of ideas, not really new but very old, began to advance from the east. England lost its intellectual leadership in the political and social sphere and became an importer of ideas. For the next 60 years, Germany became the center from which the ideas destined to govern the world in the 20th century spread east to west. Whether it was Hegel or Marx, Liszt or Schomer, Sombart or Meinham, whether it was socialism in its more radical form or merely organization or planning of a less radical kind, German ideas were everywhere, readily imported, and German institutions imitated. So again, we're talking about Germany and the exportation out of Germany of very destructive ideas. Now, recall at the backdrop of all of this, again, I'm talking about. And perhaps, again, I don't want to go off into a tangent because I want to cover some things in the next couple of videos down the line, okay? And how this idea of nationalism and of national civic identity and revolution and rebellion spread across Europe, and how that left Jews in a bit of a quagmire and put them in like a political and social crosshair where the Jew found themselves a people without a home. Again, in this coincides with the rise of the rise of the spirit and a need for the Jews to establish their own country, their own homeland. A lot of it had to do with the popularizing and the spreading of a lot of these Enlightenment ideas. Now, we're going to talk about a man in particular here who I just mentioned plays a huge role. His name is Werner Sombart. Werner Sombart. Who was Werner Sombart? Again, his name is spelled W-E-R-N-E-R, but I think the German pronunciation, I think they pronounce their W's with like a V sound, how we would pronounce like the letter V. Right? I think that's how their W sound. Right? If you have a more Anglophone pronunciation. So Werner Sombart was born in Elmslisben. Hope I'm pronouncing that right. Ermslisben, Saxony, Prussia, on January 19th, 1863, and died in Berlin, Germany on May 18th, 1941. Sombart was a German economist who incorporated Marxist principles and Nazi theories into his writings on capitalism. All right. Marxism and Nazism. All right. What are we talking about? Sombart is most known for his 1902 work, Modern Capitalism, his 1911 work, The Jews and Modern Capitalism, and his 1915 work, Merchants and Heroes. Sombart's life and legacy is obstructed by left-wing revisionists who attempt to distance his Marxist roots from its influence from its influence on the common German conception of Jewry, economics, and democracy. Let me read that again. Sombart's life and legacy is obstructed by left-wing revisionists who attempt to distance his Marxist roots from its influence on the German conception of Jewry, economics, and democracy. Like I said earlier, let me repeat for all of you out there, who every other thing that comes out of your mouth is something anti the Jew. And you do so in the name of being anti-Marx. But Marx was anti-Jewish. Oh, so you and Marx, it is okay if you and Marx have that one thing in common. It is okay if you and Werner Sombart have that one thing in common. Strange. It's strange. When remarking about Jewish preeminence in business, Sombart in his The Jews and Modern Capitalism wrote, this is a quote, "The Jews were more successful because of their dishonest dealings." Sombart goes on to cite German statesman and satirist Johann Maskirosh, quote, this is Maskirosh, quoted by Sombart, "Jews have one law and custom whenever it pays them. It's called cheating and lying." Sombart also cites George Paul Hahn's Comic Lexicon of Cheating. This is Paul Hahn's Comic Lexicon of Cheating, quoted by Sombart, quote, "Jews are cheats, collectively and individually." And lastly, Sombart cites an article titled "Jews" by an anonymous author published in the General Treasury for Merchants on the Jews of Berlin, quote, "They make their living by robbing and cheating, which, in their opinion, are no crimes." So this is like the general attitude among a lot of leading German intellectuals, politicians, even their entertainers, and so on and so forth. Right? But again, we blame the Jews for radicalizing blacks in America. Okay. But we don't like Marx. Now, Sombart also said, but was Marx a Christian? Is he a Christian or is he a Jew? Or is it that when Jews convert to Christianity, they're only doing so for a nefarious purpose? Because, of course, they want to infiltrate and subvert from within. So do we want all of humanity, Jew and Muslim included, to come into the knowledge of Christ? Do we want them to accept Christ as their Lord Savior? Are Jews beyond saving? Because, of course, when Jews come into the faith, they just bring their cockamamie atheistic views into it, like Marx did. So Jews can't be saved. So do we want them to be Christians or not? Someone claiming to be a Christian, hell, what does that even tell us about them? It tells us that they can say that they are a Christian, but what does that tell us about their morality? Christ is king, right, Mrs. Owens? What does that tell us about your moral clarity? Oh, I'm going to get back to her. Sombart also said of Ashkenazi Jews in particular, quote, ghetto life produced certain habits, certain mannerisms, which always clung to the ghetto Jew and often affected his economic activities. In part, they were habits of low social grades generally, but in Jews with their peculiar temperament, they assumed curious features. A tendency, for instance, to petty cheating, obtrusiveness, lack of personal dignity, tactlessness, and so on. He goes on. I refer to it, he's talking about the ghetto life, I refer to its influence in making the inherent Jewish characteristics more marked and one-sided. It was always there, always innate in the Jew. So ghetto life made the Jew more of what he was, more of what the Jew is born to be. A cheater, someone who lacks personal dignity, someone who is tactless. Oh man, well, it ain't anti-Semitism if it's the truth. Is that the way Jewish people were? Back in Germany in the mid-1800s, is that what they did? I don't know. It's an interesting question. But it's funny to me how when we ask this question on, well, what does it mean to be an anti-Semite? You have people who are confused. You even have some conservatives who are confused. They don't understand what it means. Because, of course, Jews run everything. Jews control the world. That's what they say, right? Banking, entertainment, politics. Let's move on. Admittedly, years of devotion to Marxian theories of economics, after years of devotion to Marxian theories of economics, Sombart would later go on to confess that Marx had made key mistakes on points of great importance. No one feel need to get into that because a lot of people would tell you that, well, Sombart went on to rebuke or to denounce Karl Marx. Perhaps that's a conversation for another day. Nevertheless, Karl Marx's influence on German socialism, as passed down through Sombart, could not be undone. So I don't know. It's funny because now you ask the question, well, does Nazism belong to the left or does Nazism belong to the right? See, I don't like to spoon feed people. I don't like to spoon feed my audience. Sometimes I'll just come out and say what I mean. Sometimes I just come out and say what I want you to know, or, I would be happy if you, saw things as I see it, right? Everyone likes to be, feel as though they are correct in their beliefs and their views and their opinions. And so, yeah, cool. I would like to have a community of like-minded folk with me and alongside me. But the point that I'm making right now, and that I'm trying to kind of build this this mass so you can kind of see what it all looks like, is that, when people make the assumption, or when people say that, Hitler was a right winger, right? And these are not just Hitler, but Mussolini, as I talked about him earlier when I talked about fascism in my video, Fascism, America's Boogeyman, right? Here you see where this assumption, you see where it's coming from, because you have leftists that are ignorant, right, on the intellectual roots of fascism, whilst at the same time you have conservatives who are ignorant on the same topic. Because it is easy to point to describe neo-Nazis, those who are who have this deep, intense sense of national pride. You can see where they are, or why they are considered to be a Hitlerian or Nazi-like by their political adversaries, because they share in a lot of the viewpoints and the opinions of the radical left, who have a very negative view on the ideas of free market capitalism and the ideas of Jews more specifically. And so now you're seeing where the two are coming together. Hence why I felt the need in the previous video to go back again, to repeat, to try and broach the subject or unpack the very concept. And it there's a lot there. I only dealt with it briefly, and that is dealing with this idea and this concept of populism, where you see the so-called right and the so-called left coming together. But on what basis and for what purpose? Because modern day conservatives sound a lot like Nazis in terms of their anti-Jewish sentiment. Yes, I said it. People think, well, Chuck, that's just, you're not being critical. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not like Marx. I'm not like Werner Sombart. I'm not them. So you see where this is going. Now, let's go back to Hayek. Friedrich Hayek, he would describe Sombart as such, quote, "He had done as much as any man to spread socialist ideas and anti-capitalist resentment of various shades throughout Germany. And if German thought became penetrated with Marxian elements in a way that was true of no other country till the Russian Revolution, this was in large measure due to Sombart." Now, let's get into this whole concept, this whole idea of war and aggression. Because make no mistake about it, war ultimately is a clash of values. A clash of civilizations is tantamount to a clash of cultures. So let's get to the kind of prevailing attitudes of the time of the German intelligentsia. In Sombart's previously mentioned 1915 book Merchants and Heroes, he welcomed what would be referred to as the, quote, German war. That's Sombart's term, German war, as the inevitable conflict between the commercial civilization of England and the heroic culture of Germany. This is the way in which Hayek describes Sombart's work. Going back to Hayek, this is Hayek describing Sombart's work. Quote, "His contempt for the commercial views of the English people, who had lost all warlike instincts, is unlimited. Nothing is more compatible or contemptible in his eyes than the universal striving after the happiness of the individual, and what he describes as the leading maxim of English morals. Be just, that, quote, you all know this quote, be just that it may be well with thee, and that thou mayest prolong thy days upon the land, is to him, quote, the most infamous maxim which has ever been produced by a commercial mind." So what is Hayek saying of Sombart? Sombart, he finds English sensibilities to be contemptible. And we here in the United States, what are we? What are we but a continuation or some sort of fulfillment of English ideals? We are the progeny of the great Anglican mind in a spiritual sense, in a political sense, in a cultural sense. Well, in Central Europe, you had this idea that those ideas of English morals, as Sombart describes it, which places an emphasis or a primacy of individual rights over that of the collective, that is the lowest sort of value according to Sombart, according to the German sensibility. So you can virtually substitute the word English for American. Why am I saying this and why is this important? Well, what are we dealing with here today? Think about it. Let's go on, but keep that in the back of your mind. It's going to become clearer as we move forward. Now, Hayek goes on. I'm quoting a lot from Hayek. Hayek goes on to describe the attitudes of Sombart. This is Hayek describing Sombart. Quote: "The English people had not only themselves become completely corrupted, every trade unionist being sunk in the morass of comfort." Capitalism, right? Capitalism, free market breeds comfort and leisure. Have we become victims of our own success that we think it can't happen? Right? We're surrounded east and west, flanked by two massive oceans. We have two relatively neighbors to our north and to our south that are not hostile. We have friendly neighbors to our north and to our south, an ocean to our east and to our west, the richest nation in human history. Leave people alone. Stay out of foreign wars. Retreat, negate, contract. Leave people alone. I mean, who are we? Why do we feel as though we have the moral high ground? We just as fucked up as everybody else. We do X, Y, and Z. We do such and such and so forth. Okay. There is no never mind that there is never a justification for war. There is no moral reason to kill. There is no moral reason to war whatsoever. Right? Right. So because that's what you believe, do you expect someone else to believe it? And what is to become of you if they don't believe as you believe? In order to have peace, do you prepare for that peace? I mean, what do you do to prepare for peace? Do you prepare for war? Or do you prepare for peace? Prepare for peace and you get war. Prepare for war and you get peace. Let's go back to Hayek's quote and let's go back to his description of Sombart. The English people had not only themselves become completely corrupted, every trade unionist being sunk in the morass of comfort, but they had begun to infect all other peoples. Only the war had helped the Germans to remember that they were really a people of warriors. A people among whom all activities, and particularly all economic activities, were subordinated to military ends. Understand, Germany was gearing up to come whoop your ass back in the mid-1800s. They were gearing up for it. Now, true enough, they lost, but did they really lose? Because in many respects, they won, because German ideas have now begun to infest. Just as Hayek described it, I described it earlier. We know for a fact that German ideas have helped to pollute American culture, pollute our politics. We know that. If you don't know that, well, listen here as I attempt to educate you on that fact. Speaking of Hayek, if you go and read Friedrich Hayek's seminal work from which I extracted a lot of this material, Road to Serfdom, he was warning us about it and other great Austrian school economists like Ludwig von Mises were warning us about it in his seminal work, Socialism. He was warning us that even though if we defeat Germany in war, what good is it to defeat them in war if we're simply going to import or adopt their socialist ideas? So wars are waged on the battlefield, and of course, wars are waged in the marketplace of ideas. So the German people are a people of warriors, right? Let's see, Islamic fundamentalists, are they a people of warriors? Do they see themselves as warriors? A people among whom all activities, and particularly all economic activities, were subordinated to military ends. Sombart knew that the Germans were held in contempt by other peoples because they regarded war as sacred. War is sacred. It is almost cathartic. It's a spiritual experience to run out onto the battlefield, armed to the nines, ready to kill your perceived enemy. It is sacred. Thus, it is one's duty almost. It is one's duty to kill. So what you gonna do? But Sombart glorifies in it, Hayek says. To regard war as inhumane and senseless is a product of commercial views. Commercial views. There is a life higher than the individual life, the life of a people and the life of the state, and it is the purpose of the individual to sacrifice himself for the higher life. War is to Sombart the consummation of the heroic view of life. And the war against England is the war against the opposite ideal, the commercial ideal of individual freedom and of English comfort, of American comfort, which in his eyes finds its most contemptible expression in the safety razors found in the English trenches. They're coming for you. I don't give a damn how you feel about it. Oh my God, this is gonna be, Israel needs to stop. It's gonna be another world war. What the hell do you think the Cold War was about? The war never stopped. It is you who falsely believe that you aren't fighting, or that someone isn't fighting you. You sure as hell ain't fighting. You damn sure ain't ready to pick up arms. Because you're sick and tired of the United States being told what to do by Israel. What do you think that says about you? What do you think your enemies see when they see you and your unwillingness to safeguard? One of the founding tripartite pillars that make up the whole of Western civilization was Jewish morality. Oh, we'll get into it. We'll get into it. There was a contemporary German Hegelian professor of political economy and I'm almost done, at the University of Munster, Dr. Johann Plange. He described in his book titled 1789 and 1914, The Symbolic Years in the History of the Political Mind, that the ensuing conflict was not a war between nations, England and Germany, but rather a war between principles. This is not y'all don't understand, and y'all don't know what we're dealing with here. You all don't know what's at stake. But again, this is the Marvel Cinematic Universe. This is the MCU. You got to come back for video after video to see how it all unfolds. It's going to all culminate in the end game. It's going to all culminate into, we're taking on Thanos in the end, right? It's going to take a while, but again, we're going to get there. We're going to get there. We're going to talk about the unholy alliance between the Marxists and the communist, the Pan-Arabian communist movement, right? We're going to talk about all that. Trust me, it's going to take some time, but like I said, we're going to get there. But right now, we're working on the first phase of German totalitarianism, okay, which was the Third Reich. Later on, we're going to get to the second phase of German totalitarianism, which is the rise of the Soviet Union. Every single both instances of which has everything to do with the conflict in Israel and Palestine. Trust me when I lay it out. Now, here's what Planger would say. Planger says, however the war may end, we are the exemplary people. Our ideas will determine the aims of the life of humanity. World history experiences at present the colossal spectacle that with us a great new ideal of life penetrates to final victory, whilst at the same time in England one of the world historical principles finally collapses. So England, the English principle, the English mind, and again, contained within language, right, are concepts and ideas. You speak, therefore you think. We here in the United States, the overwhelming majority of us here speak English, right? English is the language of the land. And so because we speak English, we speak Anglican, we sort of bring into in a real, like, conceptual way. We sort of, I don't mean to sound too spookish or metaphysical, but we sort of speak into existence with our language a reality that is that of an English life. The English man creates an English existence. We here in the United States, considering the fact that we are the cultural descendants of England, we too bring with us, contain within our language, the English life. Here, this man is telling you that the English mind, the English principle will go into extinction by way of war, by way of violence. We shall conquer them in war. Thus, our value system of intense extreme militarism will reign supreme, a kind of world, a kind of society where the rights of the individual are subordinate to that of the state, because the state, of course, is the ultimate moral organism of the society. That's the way they think. So what does that mean for you? You don't understand. You don't understand what you face. You don't understand what you're up against. You don't understand what you face. And that enemy is ongoing. It is immutable. It is eternal. If you want to be free, you have to be willing to fight it. You have to be willing to defend it. You have to. And that's just, it doesn't matter what the threat is. It doesn't matter if it's Nazism, communism, Islamism. You have to be willing to fight, or else there will be no home left for you to safely proclaim that Christ is King, Miss Owens. But I'm still not on your ass yet, but I'm coming. Your day coming, and so is mine. Wohlgemeinschaft was the philosophy. I hope I'm saying that right. Other such German Marxists of the historical school tradition who helped craft Germany's militaristic spirit in the early 20th century include, these are some names, you all have heard these names: Carl Schmitt, Othmar Paine, Heinz Fryer, Walter Rothnau, Ernst Junger, Friedrich Naumann, Arthur Miller von der Burg, and Paul Lynch. The lastly mentioned Paul Lynch, I thought this was interesting, was a journalist, politician, and writer who said in his 1917 book titled The Year of World Revolution, he wrote in that book, quote, "The result of Bismarck's decision of 1879," what he's referring to with Bismarck's decision of 1879 was his agreement to align with the Austrians. So you had the Austro-German alliance, which was done in an attempt, as far as my understanding of it, in preparation for another showdown with France, was that Germany took the role of the revolutionary. Let me repeat. The result of Bismarck's decision of the year 1879 was that Germany took the role of the revolutionary. That is to say, of a state whose position in relation to the rest of the world is that of a representative of a higher and more advanced economic system. Having realized this, we should perceive that in the present world revolution, Germany represents the revolution, and our greatest antagonist, England, is the side of the counter-revolutionary. We're almost done because I wanted to make sure that I wrapped up in enough time here in less than 2 hours. So we're going to close out. I want to fast forward to the days of Germany's second attempt at world domination. This is the era of World War II. I'm not going to get heavy off into World War II. Again, I just wanted to go into some of the ideas and the philosophies that undergirded Germany in its entire its social life, its intellectual life, its political life. We're all centered around these ideas. We're all centered around these Marxist ideas. But I want to fast forward because I thought this was important. Left-wing professor, scholar, British diplomat, and longtime political adversary of Winston Churchill, Edward Helmut Carr, explained that he pities the, quote, well-meaning people, especially, unquote, especially in English-speaking countries who, quote, steeped in the 19th century tradition, unquote, persistent in regarding war as, quote, senseless and, unquote, and, quote, devoid of purpose, unquote, and rejoices in the sense that, quote, of meaning and purpose, which war, the most powerful instrument of social solidarity, creates. So E.H. Carr, most of the time he's referred to, but his initials stand for Edward Howlett. He says that he pities well-meaning English-speaking countries because they are steeped in 19th century tradition, which thinks that, of course, England or English sensibilities will remain dominant forever. He pities those who regard war as senseless and devoid of purpose, and rejoices in the sense of meaning and purpose which war, the most powerful instrument of social solidarity, creates. So he's saying that war creates a sense of social solidarity, and those who do not view war, or those who view war as senseless and devoid of purpose, are naive and pitiful. I'm so sick and tired of people drawing moral equivalents between America and this one and that one. Listen, man, somebody got to rule the roost, all right? And we're going to find out the consequences of this lack, this belief or lack of belief in oneself. We're going to get to the consequences and what that all, how that all works itself out. And it's not to our benefit, and it is not to our glory, I can assure you. Ronald Reagan would say something famously in the 1980s, because Ronald Reagan received a bunch of flack. He received a bunch of flack for his statements, for his stance toward the Soviet Union. See, this goes all the way back to Harry Truman in the 1940s and his idea of containment. Ronald Reagan didn't believe in containment. He believed in rolling back the Soviet Union, not merely containing them, but they have to shrink. They have to roll back. We have to push back against the Soviet Union, and eventually we must collapse the Soviet Union. Everyone thought Ronald Reagan was out of his mind. Everyone thought Ronald Reagan was going to get us killed because Ronald Reagan was a warmonger. Mind you, Ronald Reagan is still someone who was widely praised amongst conservatives, perhaps not your neo-populist type conservatives who chase conspiracies underneath every other rock, because we're seeing this populist community infested with a bunch of junk, with a bunch of gobbledygook and pseudo-intellectual junk. And that's just unfortunately the way it is, because so many in our society, we're just simply confused. There's a whole lot of mass hysteria going on. But Reagan said no. But that's because, Ronald Reagan was bucking a 4 or 5 decade old a kind of political maxim or axiom that was not to be challenged, which is that the Soviet Union must remain. And, any other stance toward the Soviet Union, like, say, rolling back the Soviet Union, was preposterous, to say the least. And so he was roundly and soundly mocked and criticized. So, again, I mean, what do you do? What do you do in the face of such evil and such wickedness? You can't say anything because, I mean, look at us. Look at what we do. We aren't perfect. Before I close out, just speaking of Reagan, I mean, there's another example. Now, mind you, like a lot of these, conservatives, they're so anti-Marx, they're so anti-communist, they're so anti the left. In 1946, I believe the year it was. I believe it was the year Winston Churchill was invited to come to the United States at the behest of Harry Truman. I think by this time it was peacetime, and so a man like Winston Churchill, the man who is credited for saving Europe, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to say that in a dismissive tone, because it is probably fair to say that he did in fact save Europe. And we'll probably get to that in the next talk, because I want to talk about World War II and how the Western intelligentsia allowed for the rise of the Third Reich. And it has nothing to do with some conspiracy about Jewish bankers. That's not where we're going. I'm going with the prevailing anti-war ideology of a lot of your leading politicians and academicians across the West in the 1930s, who were still kind of demoralized in the wake and the fog and the haze of the bloodiest human conflict to date, which was the First World War. Unbeknownst to them, the second one would be even worse, and they made it that way. It was due to their fecklessness, their passivity, that caused the Second Great World War, which was even worse than the first one. In an attempt not to have another global conflict, they ended up provoking or instigating a conflict that was far worse than the first one. And we'll get into that. So all of you who don't want to see another world war, you are assuring that you're going to get one. You are assuring that you're going to get one. For all of you out there in La La Land, your Candace Owens, your Tucker Carlsons, your Hodge twins, or whoever the fuck else, you are assuring that we will have another one. But stay tuned to the next video to get that information. In 1946, Churchill came to the United States. He spoke in Fullerton, Missouri. I'm going off the top of my head, so I apologize if I get some details wrong. And Churchill was warning us. This was after the conference at Yalta. I think, I believe Czechoslovakia, I think, had been established. I forgot what they called the events that took place there. But anyway, that was Churchill's famous Iron Curtain speech, is what they called it. The Iron Curtain speech, right? And, of course, Churchill said that an Iron Curtain had fallen over Eastern Europe. And we remember that speech, and, of course, hence the term Iron Curtain, right? I'm sorry, that was the coup in Czechoslovakia happened in 1948. I wanted to go back to it. I mean, many people believe that the Czechoslovakian coup of 1948 is what marked the beginning of the Cold War. Some say it was Stalin's a Bolshoi speech, or perhaps it was the Yalta Conference that sparked the Cold War. Perhaps it began immediately after World War II ended. But nevertheless, or I don't know, perhaps it began with Kim Il Sung's invasion into South Korea. Nevertheless, we remember the speech and we use the term Iron Curtain, but a lot of people don't recall. People, I wasn't alive, but you get what I'm saying. That Winston Churchill was mocked and ridiculed mercilessly for even suggesting that the Soviet Union was up to no good, that Eastern Europe was under a blanket of Soviet imperialism that he referred to as the Iron Curtain. Even Harry Truman himself was quite disappointed with Churchill's remarks. By then, Churchill, he was no longer the prime minister of Great Britain. He had lost his party had lost to the Labour Party at the time, because there was no need for a warmonger like Churchill anymore. He had served his purpose. He helped save Europe, and now we don't need him anymore, because now we're going to go the way of Germany. Probably not of course literally in every aspect, but we're going to adopt their economic philosophies, and downstream from those economic philosophies were a lot of other things that have severely aided in the way of crippling the principles and ideas that created this great nation. But he was roundly mocked. Even Franklin Delano Roosevelt's widow came out and said something to the effect that, how dare you? My late husband fought alongside you, and this is what you've done to his legacy. It was Churchill who had destroyed FDR's legacy, because, of course, FDR and others did a great deal during that time to promote this idea that, of course, the Soviet Union was no threat. But even, of course, the great General Patton and, as I mentioned, Winston Churchill were like, we have to deal with them now. We got to take on the Soviet Union next. And it's like, no, we won the war. It's peacetime. It's over. Why is Churchill? What is he trying to do? Is he saying this on behalf of the military-industrial complex? Is he saying this on behalf of wicked, evil Jewish bankers? Who is he saying this on behalf of? Who profit from war? Who is he doing this on behalf of? It's peacetime. History has subsequently taught us, shown us, that Churchill was right. He was right when no one else would listen. That the Soviet Union was the next great menace. And it was like, nah, you just want us to go into another war. You're bitter and angry. You were ousted. And now you're trying to gin up fear. You're fear mongering, they said. Radical Islam is not a threat. You're fear mongering. The problem is, in fact, is the Israeli lobby. I don't even know what the fuck that is. But we're going to get into that on the next video. I'm going to dispel this myth that America just simply does whatever Israeli authorities tell them to do. Nothing could be further from the truth. There are so many. It is rife with examples that the United States didn't do any sort of prostrating or to simply put it, America doesn't kiss Israel's ass. Israel charted its own path. And I'm going to show you as we move forward. Many of American politicians, from FDR onward, were vehemently anti-Israel. This goes all the way back to the 1920s, not just in the United States, but in England proper, in the British Empire proper, or in Great Britain proper. And once again, that's a little Easter egg. We'll get to that in the next video. Let's close out with E.H. Carr's 1942 book, Conditions of Peace, where he boldly and proudly proclaimed that, did I read this already? No, I didn't. The victors lost the peace. This is 1942. The victors lost the peace, and Soviet Russia and Germany won it. How so, you say? Because the former continued to preach and in part to apply the once valid but now disruptive ideals of the rights of nations and laissez-faire capitalism, whereas the latter, consciously or unconsciously, borne forward, even in loss, borne forward on the tide of the 20th century, were striving to build up the world in larger units under centralized planning and control. So they just march on. They keep going. You win these little battles, but you're still losing the war. The Soviet Union, the Iron Curtain came down in 1989. The Soviet Union was dissolved in 1991 on Christmas Day, and you're still losing. How have you won these battles? You won both world wars. You defeated the Soviet Union. But why are we still at war? Why does it seem that America and the West, by and large, is still losing the war? Boy, oh boy. So I'm gonna leave y'all on that cliffhanger. So I'll put this in here too. I wanted to close out with close out this portion with these two quotes. One from Benito Mussolini and one from Adolf Hitler. Mussolini once described Marx as the, quote, father and teacher. And on another time, he described Marx as, quote, the beneficent philosopher of the working class. So Mussolini was Mussolini, Hitler, these are examples of right-wing totalitarianism. Say, the left and the right, it goes this way, and then it goes, all right? It's the whole horseshoe effect, and it starts to go up, all right? And they start to come together. You have a lot of these so-called Johnny-come-latelys on social media who call themselves conservatives, who are all pro-Trump, right? And now they're coming across like petty liberals. They're coming across like petty leftists. Have a whole lot in common with them. A lot of anti-establishment sentiment coming from a lot of so-called conservatives. Makes me wonder, what exactly are they trying to conserve? They sure as hell don't seem to be in the business of trying to conserve the republic. Hitler in February of 1941 described or declared, quote, basically, National Socialism and Marxism are the same. Now, the next chapter, the next installment, I'm going to introduce the story. I'm going to try to introduce the story of the creation of the state of Israel and the birth of Arab liberation. The creation of the state of Israel and the birth of Arab liberation. Because I wanted to put all of this at the backdrop here, and then we're going to go into, and we're going to talk about the partnership between, as I mentioned, the first era of 20th century totalitarianism with Nazism and fascism. We're going to talk about how the role that they played in the creation of Arab liberation. And then once that was over and done with, we're going to then talk about how Russia took these German ideas, right, and became the tip of the spear in terms of further pursuing or trying to move forward these totalitarian ideas, and about how the Soviet Union partnered up with the Arab world for the purpose of perpetuating these totalitarian schemes. But yet and still, there are so many so-called conservatives that every other word that comes out of their mouth is something about Israel or something about Jews. Why don't you say something about Muslims? Why don't you say something about Arabs? Arabs are not totalitarians. Oh, Arabs are not Marxists. Arabs are not socialists. I just wish you'd be honest. I just want you to be fair. You're going to see the consequences of your actions pretty soon. Now, these are the end credits. I wanted to talk about this before. This is probably my last thing, and I'm going. I'm gonna read through this real quick. So the next one, we're gonna start the next talk I plan on doing. I want to begin it where I'm going to leave off here. I want to give you guys a bit of foreshadowing. This is like the end credits. All right. So this story begins on May 29th, or in 1452 AD on May 29th. What happened on that day? Well, you'll find out. So Saint Anthony, the first patriarch of Constantinople. I know you think, dang, Chuck, you going back to what the heck? How you go from? Follow me, because I'm switching gears a little bit, but I'm still staying in that same vein. But I'm switching gears a little bit. Saint Anthony, the first patriarch of Constantinople, born in 829 AD, once said, quote, "It is impossible for Christians to have a church and not have an empire. Thus, the military is a tool of God and the church." And St. Anthony will go on to die of old age in 895 AD. Now, here's what St. Anthony said. If you don't, let me repeat that. "It is impossible for Christians to have a church and to not have an empire. Thus, the military is a tool of God and the church." Remember, Friedrich Nietzsche, of course, once said also that war comes down to a conflict of values. This is why men like Nietzsche rejected this idea that values can be ascertained, or better yet, created through a process of rationalization or through the process of reason. Values come by way of culture. Not only that, but human beings, we specialize in the creation of things which create economy, which creates currency, which creates economies. But human beings are also creators, if you will, of value systems, which then sort of goes on to create cultures, or what we call culture. So, of course, man is simply not a producer of things; he is a producer of ideas. And so, this idea that, for example, we hold these certain truths to be self-evident. Well, there is no such thing as self-evident truth. This is according to Nietzsche. And to some extent, according to, some of the great Greek thinkers, going all the way back to the classical period. And this was what also kind of marked German intellectual sensibilities during that period. There was a sort of a Greek Renaissance during that period. Again, we were probably getting a little bit too much, getting a little bit too complicated here. But again, there is no independence of the church apart from other institutions that make up the overall hierarchy of the society, which means the vitality of the church and the ideas contained within the church, because the church as an institution is responsible for disseminating certain ideas, right? As an intermediary institution, the church's ability to function is also codependent upon other human institutions that are not at all sacred. For example, the state, for example, the military, and so on. So understand. So go back. And this is why I wanted to try and draw the connections. This is why I brought up how from the time of Otto von Bismarck in Prussia, Germany, you had this combination of severe and intense loyalty to the state, backed by this intense sense of militarism, right? That was then backed by a belief that those two previously mentioned things were aspects or concepts that was linked to some sort of higher ideal. Say, for example, if you believe that Christ died for your sins. Well, if you believe that Christ died for your sins, most people say, we just communicate the good news and then that changes people. It can, but maybe it won't, because the common denominator in all of this is what? Human beings. There are certain people that are willing to kill for their God, that are willing to die for their God. What, in fact, are you willing to do? You sure as hell don't seem to be willing to fight. Most of you talk a good game, but how many of you are actually willing to die? Or better yet, how many of you are willing to be tortured? Because we talk like we understand totalitarianism. We talk as though we understand oppression. or that we understand what a horrible life, what it looks like, but we don't. We do not understand what communism looks like. We don't. We don't. I'm going to give you a quick, there was a man, I think I mentioned Richard Wurmbrand in my previous talk. Richard Wurmbrand was a Romanian priest who, he wrote the book Karl Marx and Satan. He also wrote his magnum opus is his book Tortured for Christ, where he talks about his 14 years in a Romanian prison. He tells the story of a man who was beaten severely with knives and hot iron pokers. He was beaten within an inch of his life, taken to a cell where he had hungry rats through a large tunnel funneled into the cell, where he couldn't sleep because when he would, when he would try to get a respite, the rats would attack him. And the purpose of this was to get him to blaspheme. When I say blaspheme, you all have no idea what I mean. Because the communist guards at the prison of Pitești in Romania went about conducting these unholy communions, where they forced priests to take communion or unholy communion in the form of urine and feces. Candace Owens, you gonna eat shit for God? Perhaps you would, but why should you be made to have to eat shit for God? So the story of this priest, as Richard Wurmbrand tells, is that they couldn't break him. So they went and kidnapped and arrested his 14-year-old son. This is all in Richard Wurmbrand's book, Tortured for Christ. The man's son was brought in, and his son was whipped in front of the priest in order to get the priest to denounce God, to blaspheme. The man said, "I can't take it no more. All right, fine. I'll do it. Just just stop beating my son." You know what his son said? His son said, "Hold on. Stop. No." He said, "Dad, do not," this is a 14-year-old boy now. This is as the story goes. It could be a legend. It could be make-believe, but I'm telling you. Because Pitești prison was real. The boy said, "Dad, do not do me the dishonor of having a coward for a father. Do not do me the dishonor of having a coward for a father." He then went on to say, of course, that Christ is the Holy Father of our land. And the boy was subsequently beaten to death in front of his father. His father told him, "No, you do not denounce God, even if they kill me. It's best that I die now than to die 1,000 deaths, because my father will have been made a coward." How many of you can withstand torture? Having your bones broken, your fingernails peeled off. It's not just communists. Imagine what the Islamists do to you. If you do not have a military, right, or a strong state that wields the force and the authority of the military to protect the autonomy in some respects of the church, then how can you proclaim that Christ is king without the threat of abuse and torture, when there are no other codependent institutions to protect you? This is what we talk about when we talk about Western civilization. It's not just about the church. I know that hurts your feelings. I know it hurts your feelings. Some of y'all probably mad at me, but that ain't the way it works. It doesn't work that way. I agree with what St. Anthony said. Do I agree with empire over a republic? No, not necessarily. But at the end of the day, there is no such thing as a perfect system because mankind, guess what? We fuck everything up. That's what we do. How can you proclaim that your God is the right God if you aren't willing to fight for it? Now, I'm just going to say it and let that be the end of it. All right, fine. So why the quote? Let's talk about Byzantium or the Byzantine Empire for a minute, just briefly. Byzantium was founded on May 11th, 330 AD and went on to last nearly a millennium, seeing a succession of 93 emperors. 93 emperors. To put this in perspective, if the United States were to last as an independent country for as long as the Roman and Byzantine Empire stood, then the United States would not cease to be until the year 2899. Oh no, we would rest pretty comfortably if we thought that the United States wasn't going nowhere until 2899. Okay, that sounds like a fair deal. I'll take that. But what do we mean when we say the West? The West. What do we mean? And what exactly constitutes it? Well, I won't lay out the entire history. I don't have time. I'll just sum it up with a common description many of us have no doubt heard. It has been said that the West is a tripartite synthesis of Athens, Jerusalem, and Rome. That is, our philosophic and political thought derives from that of the ancient Greeks, and our Christian faith comes from the Jewish religion. And both systems were transmitted down to us vis-a-vis the Roman Empire. It is impossible for Christians to have a church and not have an empire. Let me repeat that. The West is a tripartite synthesis of Athens, Jerusalem, and Rome. That is, our philosophic and political thought derives from the ancient Greeks who were pagans. Our Christian faith, which comes down to us vis-a-vis the Jewish people and their religion. And both systems were transmitted down to us vis-a-vis the political system of the Roman Empire. So why am I bringing up the Byzantine Empire? The Byzantine Empire. Again, these are all aspects, you see, because culture or civilization takes everything that it takes it scoops it up as it continues to go forward. It keeps it all with it. And so that is why you even see when historians, even philosophers, to draw the link between the Platonic period, the Neo-Platonic period, the Aristotelian philosophy, and to sort of combine it with the revealed truth of God. There is this unique blend between what we refer to today as reason and faith, believing in that which cannot be entirely substantiated through a deductive or reductive process. And so there has to be a unique blend of the two. And in that, and along with that, comes these sort of man-made institutions that can find a way, a safe haven, a safe context wherein all of those pre-existing and current ideas can intermingle with one another to create for something vibrant, to create for a kind of experience where human beings can get the best out of what life has to offer. And if we do not protect that safe haven, then something else takes its place. Something else replaces it. Judaism and Christianity are both indispensable aspects of the concept that we refer to as Western civilization and the actual sort of sensible and political structure that we call Western civilization itself from a tangible point of view. The institutions that make up Western civilization, Christianity and Judaism, are all a part of that rich history and tradition. From the river to the sea. Palestine will be free. What a great tragedy it would be. I think was it Douglas Murray who said this recently? And Douglas Murray said that if there are approximately 14 million Jews in the world, think about it. If 14 million Christians were to die today, it would be an indescribable tragedy. If 14 million Muslims died today, it would be a tragedy beyond belief. You couldn't even, you wouldn't even be able to put it in words. But if 14 million Jews died today, well, that's it. So just imagine that it was through. This has nothing to do, and I said this last time, this ain't got nothing to do with me kissing nobody's ass. People say all sorts of things about me. I'm Uncle Tom, I'm a this, some of that. Now I am who I am. And I don't want to be nobody else because I don't know how to be anybody else. I'm not Jewish and I don't want to be Jewish. That's not the point. I don't know why God decided to do things the way God decided to do it. But the fact of the matter is that our moral code, our moral system here in the West, by and large, came through or came into the collective mind, and it came into it came into Western thought vis-a-vis the revelatory process or the revealed truth of God came by way of the descendants of Abraham, and that's just the way it is. So could you imagine if the moral system that came into being, the moral system that came to define Western civilization, if its peoples were just wiped out? But that's not what's happening, Chuck. We're not talking about wiping out a whole people. That's all make believe. That's all farce. That's not what they want. That's not what people want to do. That's not what the secularists and their partners in Islamic jihad, that's not what they want. Okay. I'm making it up. All right. I'll be back. So the fact is, the name Byzantine did not become a common signifier of the empire until the 19th century. The Byzantine Empire was considered the eastern half of the Roman Empire, and during its time, it can justifiably be considered its better half. That's my opinion. Because again, I'm not going to go into the whole history of Rome. Don't have time. Point of fact, the term Byzantine derives from the name of an ancient Greek colony on the European side of the Bosporus between the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. By virtue of the colony's location, it was considered the natural geographic divide between Europe and Asia, or Asia Minor to be more specific. The ancients referred to Asia Minor as Anatolia, which is today the Asian half of modern-day Turkey. As previously mentioned, Eastern Rome, or the Byzantine Empire, was founded by Constantine I in 330 AD as the, quote, New Rome. Its capital city of Constantinople, the city of Constantine, was the heart and epicenter of Western thought, culture, and spirituality until its 15th century annexation. Around the dawn of the empire, inhabitants considered themselves Romans. The Roman Empire was established in 27 BC after the fall of the Roman Republic rose shortly before the birth of Christ. Let me read that again. The Roman Empire was established in 27 BC after the fall of the Roman Republic. It rose shortly before the birth of Christ. The Romans, therefore, subsequent to the Council of Nicaea I in 325 AD, came to believe that by God's grace, the Roman Empire was formed to unify his people in preparation for the coming of his son. It's Roman culture. That was until the fall of Constantinople in 1453 at the hands of the Ottomans, led by Mehmed II. Western and Central Asia would go on to be an Islamic stronghold down to the present day. The Ottoman Empire would rule the territory of what is modern-day Israel from May 29th, 1453 to November 11th, 1918, when an armistice was signed between the Allies and the Axis, thus ending the First World War. And that concludes, y'all. I just want to make this a brief. I don't know how long I've been going, probably an hour and a half, maybe close to 2 hours, not sure. I feel like I got through that fairly quickly. I feel like Ben Shapiro sitting up here with his laptop. But yeah, man. So to sum it up, I wanted to give some background into the intellectual roots of Nazism, right? And draw the link. Pretty much, Nazism is was the product of Hegelian thought, mixed in, with a lot of economic theories. There was this sort of there was this innate German sensibility, all right. This need for a German unification, and this wasn't something that was unique to the German people. You had a lot of nation-state patriotism going on in the 18th century at the time, because Europe, quite frankly, not to be hyperbolic, but Europe was a continent on fire at the time. I mean, there were uprisings, and I mean, Europe was undergoing a ton of political and military and social upheaval and turmoil, and caught up in the midst of that, caught in the crossfire of that, were the Jewish peoples in these various nations and territories, and Germany perhaps were the German mind of the German ideology. Of course, Marx and Engels, to quote the name of their book, The German Ideology. The Germans were specifically militaristic. They were especially militaristic. They were a battle-hardened people. And all it took was one man in Otto von Bismarck to take these disparate, independent Germanic nations and create a German empire. A German empire whose guiding philosophy was in the spirit of Hegel and Marx. And of course, as a result of that, created the horrors of the 20th century in both world wars, but especially and specifically the Second World War, where we saw the scourge of the Reich, of the Third Reich, and along with that, we saw a partnership, not with, in fact, Israel or the Jews, who were seeking to escape a persecution in these various European states during the age of nationalism, and the breakdown and shifting of a lot of alliances and empires and so on and so forth in the 1800s. What we saw was an alliance between these totalitarian regimes and the Arabs that occupied what would become the former, or what would become these areas that were formerly controlled by the Ottoman Empire. And we're going to speak on that more and get into the Ottoman Empire and what was going on with that and everything else. But a lot of these totalitarian regimes were partnered not with Israel, not with Jews, but they were partnered up with Arab Muslims. And at the backdrop of all of that, what undergirded all of that was the idea and the philosophy of Hegel, men like Hegel and Marx more specifically than Hegel. And when you look at the fall of the Eastern Roman Empire, of course, we saw, the Holy Roman Empire in Central Europe. But when talking about the heart of Christendom, the heart of Christianity, the fall of the Byzantine Empire in the 15th century was a great tragedy. And the landscape of the Near East and in the Middle East since the rise of the Ottoman Empire has not been the same. And once something is gone, sometimes it's gone forever. I'm not in the prediction business. I sure as hell don't consider myself to be some kind of prophet. But what I will say is that you must remain vigilant, so as to protect the sanctity of your ideals that lie within, by, of course, guarding it from without. And sometimes that entails violence, and sometimes that entails war. Your forefathers understood this. The people, the men who brought forth these ideas, right? Let me go back to what I mentioned when I talked about the Roman culture, Roman sensibilities, and what they believe, because this is what they believed about themselves. This is what made them believe. This is what made them stick to a sort of idea that they had a purpose, a kind of a superior sort of calling that kind of made them, or made the empire indispensable, a belief in themselves. They came to believe that the Roman Empire was formed to unify his people, his as in God, in preparation for the coming of his son. That's what they believed. And so if you believe that, and you should, rightfully so, because the alternative, think about it. If you're willing to deal with that alternative, then that is a conversation that we can have. Ronald Reagan said, forget the Vietnam War. It's over. Forget the era of the Vietnam War. It's over. It's done with now. We cannot walk around pitying ourselves because we've made mistakes. Your goal and the purpose is to reclaim your greatness, to believe in oneself again, because despite what other people have done in the name of those things, you yourself know what is best, because you are now going to take the baton and run in the right direction, and to take the standard and lead the people in the correct direction. Never mind what Jimmy Carter did before you. Never mind what this person did before you. Do not forsake your birthright. Your forefathers understood this. Never mind talking about the country. Since this discussion is partly religious, since it's partly theological and faith-based, your Christian forefathers knew that their mission in life had to surround it. It must have something to do with that which is in fact sacred. It has to do with something that is in fact holy. Even if that means dying and warring, because once it's gone, it's gone. That's it. So if you believe in America, if you believe in the West, then what are you willing to do? Because when it's gone, it's gone. Constantinople is gone. It's now Istanbul, where they're praying to Mecca 5 times a day. It's over. Greece will never be the same. The Greek-speaking Christian world will never be the same, because they lost. What happens when you lose? And as we see here, that there are people at times with a mission and a goal, and that mission and that goal is your destruction. And that's it. And so I hope you have enjoyed this talk, this installment. Like I said, next go round, we're going to talk about the rise of Arab liberation, the Nazis, even more so. And then we're going to get into the Soviet Union. Peace out, y'all.